Welcome to the Florida Aviation Network's broadcast of Plane Time with Ben Coleman. I'm Ron Timmermans, one of the many hosts for the Florida Aviation Network, and I'm delighted that you've joined us today for what will be a very interesting presentation by two of our representatives from Porter Radials. So you might ask, where is Ben Coleman? Well, unfortunately, Mr. Coleman is under the weather today, suffering from some adverse reactions from a post-surgery thing. But I'm here to represent Ben and to fill in for him. I'm delighted that you've joined us today and for this great presentation. As I mentioned, we've got representatives from Porter Radials today. They're headquartered in Leeward Air Ranch near Ocala, Florida. And they've been guests of us before, so we're glad to have them back. One of the guests today is the owner of Porter Radials, and that is Mr. Richard Porter. And Richard, he's some 48 years in the business of aircraft maintenance, along with his daddy, who started Zephyr Engines at Zephyr Hills Airport in the early 1960s. Richard has been around aircraft engines and maintenance for some 48 years. And just recently, he began Porter Radials, some 7 years in the making, as I guess now. Is that correct, Richard?
7 years.
Very good. And so it's good to have you here. He's going to share some of his knowledge and some of his experience and tell us a whole lot about radial engines, many things that I'm not aware of. Even though I'm a pilot, I've not had the opportunity to fly radial engine aircraft before, but I'm looking forward to it one of these days. Our other guest is his colleague, Mr. Michael Jannine, and Michael is the compliance manager for Porter Radials, and his home is in East Tennessee. And so Michael's got over 25 years in aircraft maintenance and the like, and he actually helped Richard get the compliance, the certificate for becoming a certified repair station at their location in near Ocala. So Michael, thank you for joining us as well today. Back with us again. It's good to have you both here. Richard, if we could start with a little bit about radial engines. I know you know them inside and out, but many of our audience members are just aware that there's something about a round engine, and they're made by Pratt Whitney, and you specialize in a specific one called an R985. Can you tell us a little bit about that and your business, please?
Yeah, there are several other manufacturers besides Pratt Whitney, but Pratt Whitney is one of the predominant ones out there. And the 985 engine has been around for coming up on 80 years now.
80 years?
Almost 80 years. And it's had a few evolutions to it, but mostly the same engine.
Okay. And
they were used all through World War II and assembled after that. They built them right up to put on the Beavers, the Havilland Beavers. They put them on a few of the last twin beaches were built in the early 60s. And they still build them out of new spare parts that they had manufactured ahead of time. And like I said, mentioned before, I had been in the flat engine overhaul business my entire working career from the time I was a child. My father believed kind of in slave labor, and I started as a teenager in school. And I've always loved it, always had a good time with it, but kind of got bored with it. 3,500 engines between my father and myself during the years we had it. Decided to do something different in my retirement years, and my personal airplane has a 985 on it, and it needed an engine, so I decided how hard could it be? Biggest underestimate of my life.
My goodness.
It's a lot harder than I ever anticipated it to be. I've spent 7 years, and my engine doesn't run yet.
Oh my goodness.
For my own airplane. Other people's do, but mine doesn't. But that happens, you know.
So I was going to ask you for a ride in your Cessna 195. It's not ready to go just yet.
I'm shooting to have it at Sun and Fun.
Okay, good.
We actually were putting some parts on the engine just last night. Michael and I were working on putting baffles on it.
Very good.
So it's coming along. But
so you mentioned the R985, and you mentioned it was developed even before World War II. And used on a lot of World War II military aircraft. I believe you told me the BT-13 was one of them?
BT-13 was one of the trainers that used the 985. I believe they also put a Wright of the same size, basically. The Wright made one that was similar, but the Pratt did get used on most of them.
Okay.
It also got used on all the variants of twin beaches that the military had. Also, there were some military Howards that had them. They used them on all the Howards. Stagger wing beaches used them. Going clear back to the 30s, the Spartan Executive, which was a hand-built airplane. I think there's only 30 some of those ever built.
Oh my goodness.
But they all had them. So
Well, very good.
they've been around a long time.
Okay. And Michael, if I can ask, so are you an well-experienced mechanic at Radial Engines now as well, like Richard?
I don't have the 45 years at it, but no, I'm getting there. I've got about 8 or 10 years at it now.
Good. So you've had your hands dirty a time or two, and
More than once.
yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. So in Richard's shop right now, I understand you've got a number of airplanes that are undergoing overhaul. What's parked in the on the ramp or in the shop right now at Porter Radials, Michael?
The engines are from a Grumman Goose, which is an amphibious aircraft, and then a couple of Howards on floats.
A couple of Howards on floats.
Floats, yes.
Did you say a couple, meaning more than one?
More than one.
The only
That's
two in existence
The only two Howards on floats.
in the world
In
that
the
are
world.
on floats that
Yeah.
we know of.
Yeah, and they're in your shop.
And they both showed up on the same day, and the customers did not know they were coming.
This is more than just a coincidence.
I'd like to win the lottery if I could figure out how that was done.
Indeed, indeed. So tell us, Michael, to get the repair station certificate, was this a pretty easy, just a quick paperwork exercise to get that, or was there
Well, actually,
a little
there
more
was
involved?
Actually, nowadays there's no paperwork involved. It's all done through
paperwork.
It's all done through the FAA's web portal called the Safety Assurance System, or SAS system.
Okay, so there's electronic paperwork.
It's all electronic.
Okay,
And it's time consuming, and there's a lot of back and forth, but there's always a permanent record of it now, and it's all online.
And so this compliance process or this certification process, the FAA is looking to make sure that your proposed repair station is duly qualified to work on the airplanes with, or the engines with the experience, having tools, equipment. What else
Correct.
do they look for, Michael?
They look for the process as well as the equipment. Are you doing it according to the manuals? What are the manuals saying that you have in order to have a complete shop that's certifiable for their standards? It's mostly a lot of questions and answers that you go through. It's they call it data collection tools. And when you complete all your data collection tool questions, you can go on to the next session. The data collection tools are specific to each part of your operation specifications in your repair station.
Okay, very good. And Richard, if I were fortunate enough to own an airplane that had an R985 engine, what would make me need to come to you, to your repair station, versus just having a mechanic that knew something about Radial Engines work on the engine?
Okay, one of the biggest things is to do a radial engine that has an internally driven supercharger is considered a major repair,
Okay.
which requires a repair station.
So a major repair.
In
you have to
lieu
go to
of
a
the repair station, it can be done by the person in possession of inspector's authorization under an FAA Form 337.
Okay.
But that's not as well received in the industry and stuff. People like to see it done by a repair station.
Okay.
That's one of the biggest reasons. It is an FAA requirement.
Very good. So that gives me a better understanding. So we talked a little bit about the radial engines, or at least mentioned that. So radial engines, from my limited knowledge, the cylinders are arranged around the crankshaft in a circle, right? And there's, 9 of them?
Well, there again, on Pratt Whitney 985, there's 9.
Uh-huh.
And it's 985 through the 9 cylinders collectively.
That's the displacement
The
cubic inches.
displacement of all 9 cylinders
Okay.
added up.
Okay.
So you get 9 cylinders. There are other radials that are, 7 cylinders commonly,
Okay.
as well as 9, as well as dual rows on some of the bigger engines, like
Yeah.
DC3 engines have 14, 2 rows of 7.
2 rows of 7?
They have some engines that are up to 28 cylinders.
Oh my goodness, that's a
So
lot.
depending on what you're up to.
And these engines, fuel injected or carbureted?
Mostly they were carbureted in the early days. However, they did make some fuel injection systems, and we do have some that are injected. We have an aerobatic Waco customer that's got one out that's fuel injected, and he's doing aerobatics with it. And
Works a little better when he's upside down, inverted.
it stays running.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that part would be good, I'm sure.
They were known for burping a little bit when you do aerobatics. Have you ever seen a steerman out doing aerobatics and they momentarily burp when they're upside down?
And the pilot quickly rolls back to.
Yeah, if he wants to keep it running, he does.
That's good. That's good. Are they fairly reliable engines, or are they kind of on the edge? What would you say normally?
I think they're more reliable than actually the flat engines, in my own personal opinion.
Wow.
I've got one on my own airplane, like I say, and I prefer that over Lycoming or Continental myself. I believe that the 985 is going to go down in history as in the engine world as the DC-3 will in the airplane business.
Wow. So it's
It's really reliability for millions of hours flown is up there.
yeah.
It's
Wow.
one of the most reliable engines ever built.
Well, good. Michael, so this engine was originally designed and developed in the 1920s and beyond, and
Yes.
are they still made today?
No, they stopped making them about the mid-50s.
Mid-50s.
Yes, but there's still brand new overhaul, new stock parts available.
There are new stock parts available. Somebody
Correct.
made them up way back.
Pratt Whitney made them by the thousands.
Yeah. And so they're just stock, they're readily available now, or what?
Almost all parts are readily available. The only thing that's coming is getting tight on the supply is the crankshafts. But as far as new old stock parts, yes. And of course, like everything else in life, the prices get higher and higher as the years go on.
I'm sure. And Richard, so if you have to get a replacement part for a 985, you just get it off the shelf and slap it on. Is that how it works on the 985s, or
Not so much.
not so much?
Not so
Okay.
much.
Tell us about that.
Most of your general aviation engines, like Lycoming and Continentals, most anything comes out of a box is pretty well sized to fit the engine. And one of the requirements of putting it in is to check the clearances and tolerances, be sure everything's right. But generally, they always fit. The Pratt Whitney is a little different because it has a lot of tolerances and things that depend on something else. So you put in one area and then it takes it out somewhere else. So if you start replacing parts on them, they have to be dialed in and fit. Little grinding here, little lapping there, things like that have to be done to them. So the grinders in the shop get a pretty good workout
I'll bet.
making things fit.
I'll bet.
It's temptation sometimes to let a part that's still at service limit run because it takes more effort to install it, to put the new one in than the new part cost.
Yeah.
There's a lot of new stuff left around because people were just leery of installing them. 'Cause
I can imagine.
It's a job.
I can imagine.
But
So I think we've got some pictures that we wanted to show and have you elaborate on from the slide deck that you presented to us, and this will be of interest, I think, to our audience. So if we can bring up the first of these, Richard, Michael, whichever one of you wants to take off and tell us what we're seeing and what you think is unique about it.
Okay, we're looking at a freshly completed overhaul on a 985. That's still on the assembly stand in the shop before it goes out to the test cell to be run initially. I don't believe the spark plugs are in that one yet, so it's
the
still.
front plugs aren't in it. It's
No.
probably about the time to time it and put the stuff on the back of it just prior to putting it on the test cell.
Okay, good. And on this stand, you can rotate it and move it around to,
The stand spins around, so you can put all the cylinders up.
okay.
You can also rotate it back to 90 degrees for the crankshaft to be straight up.
Oh,
Or you
okay.
could point it around to the other direction as well. You could completely flip
So it's
it over.
quite versatile and
Yeah.
obviously necessary
And
to
a
be able
little
to work.
side note about that stand, I wish I would have brought the pictures of what it looked like when we started. There was not a stitch of paint on it. It's been completely disassembled, rebuilt, a lot of tubing changed out in it,
Uh-huh.
and then powder coated to restore it. Like most of the tools that I found that I was able to rebuild instead of having to make from scratch. But there's a history with that stand. It actually came out of the Ford tri-motor operation. It was run out of Ohio,
Oh, okay.
where they used to haul the school kids back and forth with the Ford tri-motors.
Oh, okay.
It was actually one of theirs. and it ended up in Central Florida, up in Zellwood, with a guy by the name of Bob White, and ended up down in Zephyr Hills with an ex-employee of ours from our flat engine shop that was overhauling rights for him.
Okay, so you put it to work now
So
at
I drafted it
Porter
to
Radials.
put my engine on when I decided to tear my engine down about 11 years ago, before I decided to, get into business.
Sure. So in this picture, I can see the cylinders on the left side of the picture. What is that protruding out the back side of the jig there?
That would be the accessory case and the magnetos as it's set up there. I can't see the
Okay.
magnetos in the starter. That's the back end half of the engine.
The back end. So the propeller would be off to the
Left.
left side of the screen
Correct.
here when it's finally installed. Okay, good. And then depending on what aircraft it's in, there's cowling around the cylinders and the like. And like most aircraft engines, these are air-cooled cylinders, is that correct?
Yes, there's baffling and it goes in between each cylinder. And then the open port you see is the exhaust port right there. The tubes that are going into the back of the cylinder are the intake tubes from the supercharger.
Okay, so you mentioned supercharger. I'm glad you did. So that boosts the manifold pressure in this aircraft, this engine to what pressures do you get going input to the cylinders?
It's not as high as you would think. It's mostly for altitude compensation.
Oh,
because
okay.
It pulls 36.5 inches at 2,300, which is 450 horsepower. But doing that, it does, it goes a little over atmospheric,
Okay.
beyond 30 inches.
So 36 inches, you said, at 2,300 RPM?
Yeah, 36.5 is what the book
Okay,
actually
and
calls.
up to what altitude can you maintain
You'll
that?
still maintain that through about 7,000 feet.
Through 7,000,
Yeah.
okay. So when originally developed for the aircraft that were available at that time in the 1920s and through the 1950s, these were aircraft that would go up to, what, the mid-teens or higher than that? Or
Yeah, mostly. They weren't exactly high altitude. It's a 10 to 1 blower ratio.
Okay,
So when your engine's turning 23, it's turning 23,000. They did come up with another one they experimented with. It was a 12 to 1, not very popular, and they had a little few problems with them, so hardly anyone runs them anymore.
okay. What runs the blower? Is that something off the accessory case?
It
or-
drives right off the back of the crankshaft.
Right off
It's
the
gear
crankshaft.
driven.
Okay,
It runs through 3 different gears that step it up. It takes it from the 2,300 that the crankshaft's turning to the 23,000 that the actual impeller is turning.
23,000 RPMs
Yeah.
is the impeller.
It's 10
Wow.
times to 1.
Wow, that's the 10 to 1 ratio you're
Yeah.
talking about. So we have here another picture. Not sure what we're looking at here.
That's actually a rejected crankshaft on the top, and you can see it, that little white, or the little light-colored line there. That is a crack. And that's where the crankshaft fits together. There's splines. They press together. If it's a good shaft, it'll press together with about 8,000 pounds of pressure to hold the front and rear half together, and the master rod goes around that in the bearing. And that was a rejected part that they sent us from the QC lab.
So what kind of picture is this?
A
Some
mag particle inspection.
mag
Part
particle
of the,
inspection?
Yeah, part of the
Okay.
MagnaFlux inspection.
Okay, so that's great. So this is part of the testing that you do to make sure that the parts are still viable and can be used on,
Yes.
on the aircraft.
Yeah, all steel parts are subjected to it.
Yeah, yeah. And then in the bottom picture, what are we seeing there?
That was a concern that they had. You can see those little round circles around it. That was something that they're not used to seeing. But that actually wasn't, it was just an anomaly. It wasn't really a crack, but it was related to the same crankshaft.
Okay.
So unfortunately, it all got scrapped.
So are you able to do this testing on site where you're at, or do you
That
have to
is a
send
vendored item. We actually send them down here to Orlando and have that done.
Okay.
There's a shop here in Orlando that does it
I figured
for
that
us.
would be especially
Yeah, it's a
tested.
specialty
It's a
shop.
very special test. It's a business of its own.
Yeah. MagnaFlux, it's called, you said?
Yeah, that's the actual company that actually holds a patent on the name, but it's magnetic particle inspection. They magnetize the part, and the polarity of the magnetism makes magnetic particles that are in solution, in an oil-based solution, that have a fluorescent dye in them. That's what
Oh.
you're seeing.
Okay.
That's actually in a dark room with a black light looking at it,
Okay.
and that makes this crack stick white out.
And so what you're looking for in this MagFlux inspection is cracks or something that would be
It pulls it up as
deleterious?
a crack.
Okay.
The magnified part, because of the crack, it has polarity of the north and south poles of the magnetism along the crack line.
Okay.
So it pulls the magnetic particles that are in solution around it to the crack.
And that identifies or outlines
and
the
it
crack.
lines it up because it's fluorescent dye
Yeah.
inside there.
So when you send one of these down for inspection, what's the pass-fail rate, just generally? I mean,
That's the first one out of the last 10 that we've had
For
a
a
problem
crankshaft.
with, for a crankshaft for that reason. We do lose crankshafts, and the number one reason why we lose crankshafts, unfortunately, is people run the engine too long. They run them to the point they had a master rod bearing fail. And when that happens, that tears it up and makes a heat problem with it. If it gets red hot, that ruins the crankshaft also. And when the bearing is failing, that's what happens.
so what cools the crankshaft? Oil bath?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's under pressure oil.
Okay.
And if everything's running right, there's no problem. But when it starts running too long, or they've had problems. Some of the new oils have loosened up particles that will end up plugging up. We've actually had galleries get plugged up where they ran the old non-detergent oil for years. New owner comes along, picks up the airplane, goes down and buys the detergent oil, dumps in it. I've got an engine in the shop that ruined the crankshaft for that reason. That's happening
Yeah.
occasionally.
So we had a brief discussion earlier before the broadcast about time between overhauls for these aircraft engines. And I remember you said early on when the engines first came out, they would do overhauls, the military would do overhauls after about 500 hours or so. Is that right?
Yeah.
But now it can be extended beyond that, or is there an age limit, or
Well-
is there some combination of the two?
As time went on, Pratt Whitney ended up in their manual, they called to have them overhauled basically on condition. There is no published, established TVO on a 985 engine.
On condition?
Your condition is based on nothing, not generating any metal in the engine, so nothing is, failing. Your oil consumption would be acceptable. Oil consumption is the number one reason to tear an engine down. They'll start burning oil if they start giving you. They try to give you some warning.
Yeah.
They're pretty good about that. But there is an AD note that came out on them now that, unfortunately, to comply with the AD note, the engine has to be 100% disassembled. The last item that comes off of the engine are 2 bushings on the crankshaft that are required to be replaced by an AD note.
Total disassembly.
Total disassembly to remove the crankshaft. You got to split the case, split everything.
I see we got an interesting picture here. Well, there's a piston, obviously.
That's a new piston with
Yeah.
new rings that have been fitted, ready to go in a cylinder.
And we saw some pictures of
That's an
cylinders.
that's an overhauled steel barrel cylinder that's been bored out to 10 thousandths oversize. It's had new valve seats, new valves put in it. Been completely overhauled, new guides in it, so everything's back to factory new limits.
Tell me about the striations I see in the inside of the cylinder.
That's what we call crosshatch, and that's to help break in the rings
Okay.
to the cylinder bore.
So the rings on the piston actually ride up and down on the walls of the
They
cylinder.
ride up and down against that, and
Exactly.
that allows a little bit of oil to get carried with it to keep it from burning up.
Good.
And then
Good.
they also seat in against it. They smooth down.
All right. Michael, what are we looking at here? I see the
This
crankshaft
is
at the top.
a cylinder installation picture. As you can see, we have all those red caps over there are capping off the push rod lifters, and all for each one of the cylinders.
Capping off the push rod, what?
Lifters.
Lifters, okay.
That part of the behind those red plugs on the top are the lifters to supply oil to the push rods, and they float off of a cam ring in that nose cone section, and that's how the valves are actuated. The bottom plugs are from the supercharger section. That's open pineapple with a harness installed. A little bit. That's in the assembly process before the cylinders get attached.
So Richard, I think you said that when an owner brings in an aircraft with an R985 engine, you invite them to be present for the teardown. Is that generally a good idea?
We find it to be an excellent idea.
Okay.
Number one, he gets to see and learn about his engine. They seem to like to get their hands dirty. Most people that are into these airplanes that have these type of engines like to work on them themselves as well. But it's obviously more than the average owner could do.
Yeah.
So
indeed.
we find that to be, something that they enjoy doing.
And
like I
probably beneficial for learning.
Like I said, the two guys with the Howards actually both showed up, and we tore them both down on the same couple days in a row.
Wow.
And they were there
They
for
got
it.
to learn from each other's
Now,
engines.
now
as
Ron,
well as
I
their own.
I will say one thing, that we do not do the R&Rs on all the engines we work on. They don't fly them in like they normally did in a flat engine shop. Most of the radials get pulled in a shop where the airplane is based at. Usually it's part of other work they're doing, something like that. The Howards, for example, they were shipped out of Wisconsin and out of Minneapolis area. We just got 2 engines in the other day that we haven't mentioned that were shipped in out of the Seattle area. The Goose engines were sent up from Bartow for Gooses being restored down there. So they come from all over, and they all come in big boxes.
Yeah.
This is a
Generally
wiring
speaking.
harness loom that you're looking at here on the screen. This is how the spark plug wires are installed in the protection provided for them on the engine.
And the semicircular tube that we see there, Michael, is what?
The
Is
back,
that a conduit for the?
That's
this
the
is-
rear harness.
the rear harness.
Oh,
This-
that's okay. It's not a tube. Okay, it's a harness. I
Yeah.
see. Okay, good.
Each magneto has its own harness loom.
Uh-huh.
The left mag operates the rear spark plugs, right hand does the front.
Okay. I find it interesting that you invite the owners to be there present for the teardown and the like. I also like to be around my mechanic when he's working on the doing the annual, but he's got a certain price for the annual, and if I'm there to help him, it's about $500 higher. I'm not sure.
I
why
should
that
charge
is.
more, but I don't. But I do want to educate them.
Well, I always appreciate the education. Being around a mechanic, experienced mechanic, as they're tearing into your airplane is always beneficial to me, I know. So this is great. I can imagine how much I can learn by standing around, but I'm afraid you'd charge me for that, but that would work too. And what do we see here, Michael?
This is the magneto, and this is the magneto block. It's made out of phenolic, and this is where the wires come out of the ignition harness, and they go into that magneto, and there's a cover that snaps over it, and that's how, I believe that's the front mag, the right mag there.
Yeah, that's the right mag.
Yeah, and the that block right there will go right into the magneto, and there's a cover that goes on top of that, and that's how your wires get from the magneto to the. There's a better picture.
The
To
one
the
on
spark
the
plugs.
one on the left is closed up.
Okay, good.
And it's
And
done.
So 18 spark plugs on this machine,
18
right?
spark plugs, and it takes about 3 days to put together and loom and do all the work on the harness.
Wow,
They're incredibly labor intensive.
quite an effort,
And,
indeed. Well, as we, this is going to be a good spot to take a short break while we recollect, and you have a chance, our viewing audience, to use the restroom, get something to eat, or refill your coffee cup, or whatever it is. We'll be back in just a few moments for the rest of this presentation with Porter Radials and our 2 guests, Michael Jannine and Richard Porter, and learn even more about our 985s and what the future is for this engine and for those of us who are going to be involved in overhauling and repairing these engines and keeping them running for another 80 years, I hope. I'm Ron Timmermans with the Florida Aviation Network. Don't go away, but come back in just 15 minutes and we'll have the rest of this segment, plus George Bartuska with weather, the weather guy. We'll also hear from him later today. So stay with us and come back again soon.